Wearing 511 pants for 15 years. They're stylish, they're tough, they're durable, and they're stretchy. Go to logo. Cut to logo.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Riley, and we're here again on the broadcast booth stage. Still some time left at the show, and we hope you'll come by and say hello. I'm pleased to introduce to you our next two guests, two guys together because they actually do quite a bit together. In fact, they were just telling me they took over the training talk on PDN, Personal Defense Network, and that's really cool. You guys are killing it there with that show. We'll have our own show here today. We've got on my left, we got Barret Kendrick with Barret Co-Training. On my right, we got Deryck Poole with Echo 5. And you guys have been really instrumental in launching off the ground together with Rob Pincus, who we had on the show yesterday, the whole Defensive Shooting Fundamentals course, the curriculum that USCCA has been pushing for the last year and a half, whatever it's been, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so and just recently you were teaching an instructor course up in Wisconsin. You guys are going all over the place. I just wanted to kind of pick your brains a little bit about the DSF curriculum and like what you think that is it really separates this from everything else out there as far as instructor coursework, you know, that's preparing these instructors to really help people become defensive-minded individuals, really prepared for anything that might come their way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The DSF program developed by Rob Pincus. A lot of it is it comes over from the combat focused shooting program, right? Yeah, so that's been how long ago?
2003 is when it was
2003, an original program. So a lot of evolution in the program over the years. Obviously, a lot of people familiar with that program.
Yep.
Back in 2011, we started the DFC program, right?
Yeah.
Was it 2011?
Yeah, that was actually the kickoff 2011 instructor conference.
Yeah, and that's the defensive firearms coach, right?
Yes.
Program. Yep.
Yeah, and that we were running that for a while, and then Steve Fisher hooked up with Rob and said, hey, we're interested in, adding a live fire component to the CCHCF course that's already hugely popular, but we need live fire. So, that was a project, 2 years in the making.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of work put into that, but it's a great program because, like myself, I got started. I was a Marine. I got out of the Marines. I became an NRA instructor, but I wasn't a defensive firearms instructor. I knew how to teach basic pistol, range stuff, diagnosed with the pie chart, perfect. It's a different animal. So this is actually, somebody that's interested in, I want to teach personal defense with firearms. This is the course that, they can get their feet wet, and build up, to the point of, taking their career wherever they want with defensive firearms.
That's awesome, man. That's great.
When you think about the students coming into defensive shooting courses and whatnot, obviously there's a lot of people interested in home defense, maybe not even concealed carry, right? Maybe interested just home defense. So this the DSF program has a whole home defense component where we're teaching basic fundamentals. We're not teaching people to go clear rooms, that kind of stuff, but we're giving them a plan of action, what to do if they think they have an intruder in the house. Not what a lot of gun guys might do where they might want to grab the AR and maybe go searching for something, but what advice would you give your daughter to do? What advice would you give your child to do? That's the kind of stuff that we're teaching inside this program. And there's a lot of people interested in it. So it's if you're trying to to get into the defensive shooting instructor world, this is a fantastic place to start because this is where most people are going to be filling most classes for.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what would you tell someone, like, say a daughter, for instance? I mean, my kids are starting, they're still quite young. I have my son, my oldest is 12, and I got a 10-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old daughter. They're starting to learn, we get them started fairly young. But my 12-year-old son, he's to the point where he gets guns, and he's safe. He understands how to handle a gun. He shoots some matches with me competitively sometimes, which is really a lot of fun. Goes to the range. He loves to learn the defensive side of things as well. But he's still not to a level where, I could really. He's 12, right? But what would you tell someone, a younger child, or maybe even a spouse that's not as experienced as yourselves? Something's going down, and they need to take action to defend themselves or the family. What do you think is like at the core of defending oneself, especially if a gun's involved? What do you say to tell someone in, say, 30 seconds?
Pick up the gun, get a good grip, extend the gun in parallel with your line of sight, touch the trigger, and press the trigger until the bad guy stops.
Yeah,
that is defensive shooting at its base. That's where we start all of our classes. In IC training classes, all the way through the DSF program, it's all the same start of, at its root base, that is what defensive shooting is.
See, what I love about that is you're not saying, well, there's this stance that you got to stand in, and you got to do this thing with your hand, and you got to put that front sight and the rear sight in equal height, equal light. I mean, that's all good and fine, but you're not saying anything about that. That's what I like about putting it as simple as that.
Well, I mean, the when we look at the data, the high center chest is what is majorly used to stop the threat. Yeah. So in that instance, don't worry about the sights. Sights happen in our program, right? We get to balance the speed and precision, and we talk about intuitive sighted fire, closing an eye, equal height, equal light, superimposing that over the target.
Right.
But we start at that base level, like you were asking earlier, at the worst case scenario, what can we do to make our loved one safer?
Yeah.
That's not familiar with guns.
And that really is what it comes down to as far as shooting a gun. I mean, it's you obviously got to hold on to it. You got to hold on to it fairly firmly, or you're going to not have very good control over it. Aim it and shoot it, right?
That's it. That's what we teach to aim is the kinesthetic alignment, intuitive unsighted fire. Learning how to get the gun out there and hold it in a consistent way, learning how to get it out there to a consistent position is in and parallel with your line of sight out there to the target. And the gun's already lined up, right? The sights are lined up. They're not precisely aligned, but they're aligned well enough to be able to get defensive hits at defensive distances.
Right. And one of the reasons why I'm kind of really hitting you on this topic is because I sometimes see shooters that I think are kind of holding themselves back because they're like really overthinking the idea of shooting a gun, especially in a defensive context. And in a defensive context, we're not talking about a lot of times, we're not trying to shoot bullseyes at 25 yards. We're talking usually relatively close distance, generally a decent sized target. And there's nothing more intuitive than just take your finger I want to point at that sign on the wall and just point it,
Yeah, when did you learn how to
think
do that,
about it, right? And so pointing a gun, same thing. You don't have to think about it. I want to point at Josh here who's working our booth,
and your fingers in line with your eyes, right?
Right, bring it up to the eyes. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Not at all.
Now, once someone kind of gets the gist of intuitively being able to shoot a gun, what do you think is kind of the next logical step?
We pretty quickly get into what Deryck was referring to a second ago and balance of speed and precision. Not all targets are this big at defensive distances where we have a clear line of sight to that, right? Sometimes there may be something that brings up a much higher perceived penalty of a miss, right? Think about yourself in a public environment like where we are here today. If you had to use a firearm to defend yourself inside of this environment, there's a massive perceived penalty of a miss.
Absolutely.
If you miss, where's that bullet going, right?
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden you may have to apply, more control, over that cone of deviation out there to your target, right? Cone of deviation. Think about deviation is a cone extending out of the barrel of the gun that's brought on poor trigger control, poor recoil management during follow-up shots. If you're moving while actually trying to shoot, you're dealing with a target out there that's also moving. It's the difference between where you want the bullet to go and where it could end up in the world, right?
Yeah.
So we have to learn to control that cone of deviation. So, we fairly quickly we get into teaching them intuitive sighted fire, teaching them how to use the actual sights on the firearm, which is really the complete reversal of what most people would think, right? You show up to a gun class, well, we have to teach people about what the sight is, what the front sight is, what the rear sight is, how to use those to be able to hit the target. But the reality is that's the harder skill. That's the more complex skill. So let's teach them the intuitive sighted fire first, but then yes, not all targets allow you to be able to do that. So pretty quickly we get into intuitive sighted fire.
Right. Now, obviously, now we start using sights, and most people, with a little bit of, training, it doesn't take too much to pick that up. But what seems to be maybe more of a struggle for some shooters is pressing the trigger in such a way they don't screw everything up, right? So how do you guys teach, what's, without overcomplicating things, but what's the big thing that you would say to a developing shooter about how to work the trigger?
We tell them, touch the trigger and press. And once you start pressing, consistently press. Don't stop. Like a Glock or some of the other striker fired guns or even double action, single action, the pressure starts to build and then they get to that wall of they're holding it and now all of a sudden they want to wait for that perfect instant to just snap it through and get the shot to fire perfectly. But if they touch the trigger and begin pressing and consistently press, and when we have problems with students doing that, we'll make them say out loud, press, 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 and stand there and watch their trigger finger.
Right.
But the way we run class with our end users is Once we teach in suicide fire, we ensure every student on the line can hit a number. We say, look at the 3, extend on the 3, close your eye, sight alignment, sight picture, touch the trigger, nice, smooth, consistent press, bang, they get the hit, and then we look at them and go, okay, you just demonstrated that you possess the skill to get the hit. Yeah. Now it's on you to continually do that. I will correct you as necessary, but you can do it.
Yeah.
And it usually happens within, 1 or 2 shots for every student on the line.
Right. Yeah. Cool. What do you guys do much instruction where like you're working with a lot more advanced students and you're starting to get into the nitty gritty of like really starting to nail, drill down on the finesse side of that's what I would call it, kind of like really getting into specifics on grip, specifics on trigger. I'm obviously talking outside DSF curriculum here. I'm just kind of curious your own personal philosophies on some of this.
Things on like grip and stuff, as we're looking down the line, clearly if I see somebody that's gripping the gun so hard that they're white knuckling it, right? Relax a little bit. We don't need to hold it that firmly. We need to hold it secure enough to manage the recoil, but we don't need to overgrip it. So, we'll correct stuff like that as we go down the line. We'll push the students. We walk down the line and, see the squinting of the eye, and I know that they're using the sights on targets that they don't need to use the sights on. And I'll remind them, you're better than this. Go ahead and push your ability to be able to do that. So we'll kind of tweak stuff like that, but really getting into the the mechanics of staging triggers and that kind of stuff, we leave that completely outside of what we're teaching because it's defensive shooting, right? And it's if you think about the context of something like this, things even like sight alignment, sight pictures. The only time it's ever going to be perfect is in the book. It's on the piece of paper. It's how you drew it on the board. So it's we're not looking for that. We're wanting to teach them how to be able to get that trigger back in such a way that the gun's going off without a lot of movement in there. So that's really where we're trying to put a lot of the focus on, is teaching them how to manipulate the trigger, making sure that their grip is good, for managed recoil, right? Making sure of all of that kind of stuff, but really don't get into a lot of the other.
Except for until we get to APH, right? We go to APH. Our APH class, we have unreasonable distances.
And that'd be advanced pistol handling?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. And that's when we'll get into unreasonable distances, and we'll talk about, instead of that really like engaged lats and all the muscles for like that intuitive sighted fire, we'll more of the skeletal stand up, or maybe even go into some sort of a Chapman position, to get the hits that we need at like 50 yards plus.
Sure.
Or then we'll go extreme distances, right? We have little logos on the target that are like crazy small, and that's when we talk more about, real precise trigger control and stuff like that. But for the most part, the vast majority of that class is shooting from unorthodox positions. So like right now, if something happened, how do I get my gun from here? Like I'm appendix carry right now. I don't know how.
Same.
Right. So we teach, you got to open the legs, lean back, that kind of stuff. That's the bulk of that class. But we do hit those finer points of shooting.
Kind of follow-up question. You talked about grip and, someone that was like really white knuckling it to back off a little bit. And then following that up with, say, like recoil control, recoil management. How do you, what is your philosophy on recoil management? Like, what is that something that, someone really, thinks about, or is it just something that naturally happens because of the way that they are, handling or gripping the gun? I'm just curious your thoughts there.
Blank slate students, teaching them properly, it naturally happens, right? Adding corrections where we need to add corrections. Now, when you've got some students that came in that, maybe were taught years ago to do things like go with the recoil to where they allow the gun to recoil, that's the kind of stuff really that we have to really jump into a whole lot more of teaching it explicitly and not letting it organically happen. We teach students to really get at full arms, both arms at full extension, where we're actively engaging the shoulders, getting them forward, and doing that organically with our bodies. That really limits the amount of mobility that we end up having. So I'll probably end up ripping my jacket if I try to go into full mobility, full active forward today. But driving that out there, if we actively engage those shoulders forward, we can look at that as on our students as we're walking down the line, that their movement with their body all of a sudden is limited. You can no longer take your arms and put them up over your head when your arms are at full extension with the shoulders actively engaged forward. So with teaching the students how to do that, making sure they're gripping properly, making sure that their both hands are high up on the gun as they can without interfering with the operation or with things like the slide coming back towards the rear. Teaching them how to do all of that, the managing of the recoil is kind of naturally happening. You know, if you see the student that's where the gun's just kind of flipping up at that point and not putting enough support inside the wrist, then all that, is corrected when needed.
Yeah, good stuff, man. Yeah, and that's kind of what I gathered is, I mean, if you're really, at the core again, if you're just intuitively grabbing a gun and just really extending it aggressively towards the target, generally I think most people get it. They know they're gripping firmly. They're probably locking those wrists, generally speaking. Sometimes, though, I might try to spend a little time with a student trying to help them, get that gun back on target a little bit quicker, because, again, sometimes you'll kind of see that little, going with allowing the recoil to push them back a little bit.
Yeah, we teach a weight forward stance, right? We want the shoulders out there. If somebody's just standing on the line, we want them out there in front of the hips. We're making sure that their face is behind the gun, both arms are full extension, where that weight does end up getting forward at that point.
Right.
And the way that we teach students recoil kind of going through is that we teach them getting good kinesthetic alignment with the gun, right? Driving the firearm out there, and we do that a single round at a time, taking them step by step and teaching that trigger press and that kind of stuff that Deryck was talking about a minute ago. And then we get into going into one round on their own. Well, from there we want to get to multiple rounds and talk about why we want to change the number of rounds during that string of fire and how fast to shoot that string of fire on the target and that kind of stuff. But getting them to that point, we start off with 2 rounds. Making sure that they're managing that recoil in the way that we want them to. And then we jump them up to 3 rounds. And at that point, once we know that they're managing that recoil, then we have them vary that string of fire, usually about 3 to 5 rounds.
Yeah. I like that too. Not getting into that routine of draw, fire 2, draw, fire 2.
Right.
Mix it up a little bit. Absolutely.
Well, what's a gunfight? It's a race to the last round.
Yeah.
Right. So we want to learn what our fastest, consistent string of defensive accurate hits are.
Yeah, for sure. I want to ask just kind of, this is probably getting close here to the end, so thoughts on movement?
Movement, there's a very specific time shooting and moving actually should occur. And it has to be a contact weapon and they have to be right at that point of a tie. So we teach at or beyond 2 arms reach. So a guy with a bat, a knife, right at or beyond that 2 arms reach, it could be a bad tie where you pull the gun, and as you pull the gun and pull the trigger, they hit your jugular or something. So in that instance, it makes sense to run away, because how safe are you as long as the contact weapon doesn't touch you? You're 100% safe. So running away from a contact weapon is when I advocate for shooting and moving, because running in a straight line, looking over your shoulder, however, keeping the gun in parallel with the line of sight, now you're not going to get that perfect high center chest, but you have that whole vertical string, right? The whole like shooting and moving and walking. I personally feel that there's too much of a deviation in the gun, the movement. You're trying to control too much that you're not going to get the hits that you need as quick as if you would just laterally move, get the gun out, drive it, plant, shoot.
Yeah, that's good. I think movement with purpose is key. Like sometimes I see some training that's done, and it's just like we're just moving just to move.
Right.
And I guess that's probably not always like at the very least, if you're in a gunfight, you don't want to be standing in a static position, but having a plan in mind, having a purpose is probably not a bad idea either.
Yeah, and that's it. It's as Deryck talked about, lateral movement, right?
Yeah,
Until the gun's in that shooting position, let's continue that movement, real movement, while we're doing that. So like today, I've got jeans, a gun on, center line carry, but I've got a couple layers that are covering up that gun right now. If I had to go to my firearm, clearly it's going to take a little bit more time to be able to get that gun out into a shooting position than it would be when I'm standing out there at the range and I already know that I'm getting ready to pull the gun out of the holster with maybe just a T-shirt carrying it, right?
Sure.
So that's my movement should be athletic. It should be explosive, and it should be lateral to that target. But at some point, it's time to start shooting. I don't want to keep moving like that, right? Because just like Deryck said a minute ago, it's a race to the last shot. Well, I want to get to that last shot on that person as quickly as I can, and I'm certainly capable of being more precise or being able to control that recoil a whole lot better and get hits on target if I'm in a static position once that happens.
Yeah. Good thoughts, gentlemen. I'm sorry, but we're out of time. I appreciate you coming up here and joining us on the stage, getting to know you a little bit more and talk about everything going on with defensive shooting fundamentals and the other training you do. You guys keep up the great work and keep preaching the good word. That's kind of how I see it. You're out there, helping people be better prepared, better mindset, all that stuff.
Absolutely.
So appreciate everything you guys do.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thanks for having us on again.
So, folks, we take a little bit of a break here. I actually got to go upstairs and do a presentation, and so we'll have more great content. I think Jacob, yeah, he's right over there. He'll be back up on stage here and do some more interviews. So we'll see you here back in a bit. Again, show ends at 4 today. We've got lots more great interviews. We'll see you here again soon. Okay.
Oh, nice choice. Have you tried our boxer briefs?
No thanks. I always go commando.
Your card, sir.